I'm more worried about finding the right balance.
The state of Israel is too important to the Jewish people to leave to Israelis alone.
We are trying to stop a singularly nasty regime from gaining weapons of mass destruction.
The Middle East is on fire today, principally because of the appeasement of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Our policies exiting Syria are in line with what Russia wants.
Welcome to The Great Debate.
The Great Debate.
Thank you for joining us for The Great Debate.
We will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first.
I'm not aligned with Putin. I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America.
And America should always be aligned with those principles of democracy and truth and freedom.
The Trump administration's illegal freeze of congressionally appropriated funding, including a foreign aid.
When I first went to NATO, my first meeting, I noticed that very few people were paying.
We are not the policemen of the world.
Please welcome AJC Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer, Jason Isaacson.
Oh, good evening. I should point out, by the way, that first picture you saw up on the in that video of Michael Anton, he's now heading the technical team for the Iran nuclear talks. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're now just shy of 100 days since President Trump began his second administration, an appropriate time to step back and assess the challenges and opportunities and gauge administration performance on a range of issues. In this AJC Great Debate, as Curtis has just previewed, we'll be examining the foreign policy approaches of Trump 2.0 and the principles that underlie that approach, principles that are often broadly defined under the label America First, and that have sometimes been characterized by critics as leaving America alone. Please join me in welcoming to the Global Forum stage Bill Kristol and Ellie Cohanim. They shake hands, by the way. So I'm going to ask each of our debaters to offer 2 minutes of opening remarks, and then each will be given 2 minutes to respond. And after that, I'll ask a series of questions, giving each debater 2 minutes to respond, and then, if they wish, 2 minutes to react to those answers. On and on and on it'll go until we have dinner. We'll wrap up the debate with 1 minute closing remarks. I also wish to remind the audience that no reaction other than brief, polite applause will be welcome following our debaters' remarks. With that, by contest, the first to speak will be Bill Kristol. Bill?
Thanks, Jason. I'm already confused about the rules of this debate, but I'm sure we'll handle it, right? Yeah, I like the brief, polite applause part. That's good. Yeah, right. Yeah, thank you. That was good. It's good to be here. It's good to be with the AJC. I feel like I've had a long relationship with you all. I actually debated in 2012. I don't know if Jason, if you moderated that too. I debated Barney Frank here in the earlier Great Debate. One of your young AJC staffers, who I think was in high school at the time, said she was very amused that I had debated Barney Frank. I had been the Republican, Barney Frank obviously, very important Democratic member of Congress, and here I am as the ex-Republican debating a real Republican. So I feel like I'm not sure this will be the best debate ever, but I think I'll be the only person perhaps who's been on both sides of an AJC debate. I think that's appropriate though, and maybe gets to the topic here, which is that I don't think I've changed, certainly in foreign policy, I don't think I've changed my views very much. I started off when I was in college. I volunteered for Scoop Jackson actually when he was running for the Democratic nomination for president in 1972, really a wonderful man and a great Cold War liberal. That worked for Pat Moynihan in 1976 in the New York primary here, in the Democratic primary for Senate, which Moynihan won by 1% over Bella Abzug. Working in that summer in New York Democratic politics kind of was enough, so I became a Republican soon after. Went to Washington in '85 to be in the Reagan administration, which I was proud to have served in the George H.W. Bush White House. Was very close to John McCain in the 2000s, but I am not on board the America First agenda, and so I'm now back to, I don't know what I'm back to exactly, back to being maybe a hawkish Democrat and a non-Trump Republican. So we can debate all these topics, but I thought I would just but I genuinely have affection for and respect for the AJC, precisely for holding this kind of debate, which not every organization does in this day and age.
Thank you, Bill. Ellie, your turn.
Well, first of all, good evening, AJC. It's so wonderful to be with you. I am a former member of the New York Regional Board, and this is an organization that's dear to my heart, so thank you for this invitation. The question before us tonight isn't whether America should lead, I would argue, but how. And I'm here to lay out that an America First policy as delivered by President Donald J. Trump in his first term, and today in the almost first 100 days of his second term, is the only foreign policy which gets it right for the only constituency that matters, and that is the American people. Let's set the record straight. America First does not mean America alone. It means putting American interests at the center of our foreign policy. It means leading not with blind idealism and blank checks, but by achieving peace through strength. We need only look back at President Trump's first term to gauge the success of America First. President Trump was the only president who deterred Putin. There were no Russian invasions under Trump. The Iranian regime was also contained. They were in a box, thanks to Trump's maximum pressure campaign. President Trump brokered the Abraham Accords, the first peace deals between Israel and her Arab neighbors, the first in 26 years at the time, and I was honored to play a small role in that effort as part of the Warm Peace team. And finally, President Trump took on our leading adversary, China. Trump handed Biden a world at peace. Biden handed him back a war on fire with 2 wars on 2 continents and a China that's on the move. In less than 100 days, the Trump administration has managed to de-escalate these wars. It's conducting shuttle diplomacy in every corner of the globe, is rearming and reasserting support for our ally Israel. The Trump administration is repairing the damage caused by the weak and feckless policies of the previous administration. Meanwhile, we've also stopped pretending that broken international institutions are somehow sacred. The United Nations, the World Health Organization, the ICC, and other international bodies that have been captured by China and the Global South and become platforms for dictators and forums for moral decay, anti-Americanism, and too often anti-Semitism. I believe the time has come to hold these international organizations accountable. So the choice is not between America First and America alone. The real choice is between principled leadership and more of the same failed Washington status quo. The American people have spoken. They want strength, they want peace, and they want America first. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Let's hear from you, Bill, if you'd like to rebut anything that Ellie has just said.
I agree with everything. You know, I don't agree with everything, actually. When Donald Trump first used the term America First in 2016, I thought, well, it sounds good. He likes this. He wants to be pro-American and wants to characterize his opponents as, quote, globalists, whatever that means. Actually, an insult that I take as perfectly as kind of praise, because one does care about the world. It's not the case, after all, that the only constituency an American president has is Americans. Obviously, people in this room would think of another country that an American president should care about, the people of that country, but also many other countries. We kind of care if there's unnecessary suffering around the world. We can't always do something about it. We care if there are dictatorships. We care if there's tyranny. We care if there are droughts. And one of the proud things about America of the last 80 years is we have been a responsible, mostly, global power that has done good. We've done well for ourselves and good for the world. But when he used the term America First, I just figured he didn't know its disreputable and really dishonorable history from 1940-41. An organization started to keep us out of World War II after the Nazis had conquered France, in the middle of the Blitz and the Battle of Britain, an organization that was tainted by really pro-Nazi and anti-Semitic views. I assume Trump didn't know that. The term has been used differently, obviously, in the last 8, 9, 10 years, but I still think it's fundamentally a point of view that doesn't understand that the post-World War II global order, of which we were a key part, has produced a heck of a lot of peace and prosperity for us and for the world. Certainly compared to the good old America First days, when we were staying out of wars and in fact got dragged into 2 horrible world wars in 1914 and then in 1939, 1941. I mean, America First is a recipe for going back to the 20s and 30s. The post-Cold War order, one can say it's this failed status quo. It wasn't a failed status quo. By historical standards, 1945 to 2016 or even 2024 has been a successful status quo.
Thank you, Bill. Ellie, you can rebut Bill's opening statement or you can rebut his rebuttal.
Well, you know, I think if Bill is trying to make the argument that the world is in the same place right now as it was after World War II, I think that's just, you know, an argument not even worth making. And to continue to go back to talking about the Nazis at a time when we're seeing, you know, Democrats right now not fighting present-day Nazis. We're talking about the Hamas. We're talking about the radical Islamic anti-Semitism that has picked up the mantle of Nazism. I just find it just old and staid to continue to make these same sad and pathetic arguments when we are facing new realities in the world today, and we need to rise up to the new challenges. And there's certainly nothing wrong, and in fact, everything to be proud of, a U.S. president that once again prioritizes American citizens and makes Americans good and what's best for our country the focal point of our foreign policy.
Thank you, Ellie. Let me begin with you, the round of questionings that I have. Last year's Republican Party platform promised to, quote, strengthen alliances by ensuring that our allies must meet their obligations to invest in our common defense. With war raging in Europe since Russia's February 2022 invasion of Ukraine, defense spending by NATO allies has ticked up, and as of last summer, 23 out of NATO's 32 member states were reported to have met or exceeded the benchmark of 2% of GNP on defense. With 2/3 of the NATO alliance now fulfilling an obligation the member states made a decade ago, there was talk within the Trump administration, as you know, about pulling the United States out of NATO or at least cutting America's large investment in the alliance. How does an American-first foreign policy affect our historic alliances?
Well, Jason, I take issue with the very framing of that question because the question frames it as, you know, how do our alliances get impacted by America First foreign policy? And I think the way to look at it is how do the American people get impacted by our alliances? And in the case of NATO, I think there's actually an argument to be made that NATO does benefit the American people as long as it's an alliance and not a dependency on the United States. When it comes to Europe, the President Trump has asked the Europeans to understand, again, that the world has changed since 80 years ago and perhaps even 20 years ago. The president has asked Europe to increase their defense spending, to invest in their own militaries, as war is raging on their continent, to take greater responsibility for their own territory. Let's remember, the only question is not the transatlantic relationship here, but you know, I think the question for our allies around the world is the world safer since Donald J. Trump came back into office? And I would say the answer is a resounding yes. Every day the United States is securing our hemisphere every single day. The United States is securing the Indo-Pacific region. The United States is securing the Middle East. We've seen more assets moved into the Middle East in the past few weeks than I think in many, many years, and that sends a very loud and clear signal to the Iranian regime and, of course, the Houthis that are under a huge aerial assault, right? So in less than 100 days, the president has managed to, again, de-escalate wars on 2 continents and reassure the world that America is back and American power is back, and you know, we no longer have a president in office who we're not sure exactly if he's on his nap schedule or if he's working.
Thank you, Ellie. Bill, if you would like to respond for a minute. Okay.
I think, you know, I don't think the assault on Ukraine has not been de-escalated, and you can know that if you look at the footage of the horrible bombing attacks on civilians in Kyiv and elsewhere. That is not a war between two countries who just kind of accidentally stumbled into a war. It's a war of conquest, sort of almost genocide, brutal war, launched by a dictator against a democratic neighbor. I wish the Biden administration had been a little more aggressive, actually, in helping the Ukrainians, but I give them credit, and I give NATO credit for stepping up, and the European nations, whom I was skeptical would they really step up, did step up and have done quite a lot. If you go to Prague, if you go to Czech Republic, one place I happened to have been the last year or two, I think there are 500,000 Ukrainian refugees in Prague, in a country of 10 million people. Take it in, no problems, no resentment, some demagogues trying to foster a populist backlash, a nativist backlash, but failing, actually. And the same is true if you go to Berlin, and the same is true in Poland, and those countries are doing well. And you know what? It's a good idea to have allies. It's good for us. It's good for them. The NATO alliance has been an unbelievable success. No wars really at all. No major wars. I guess Milosevic, between 45 and 22, when Putin invades Ukraine. The Asian alliance has been a huge success with Japan and keeping peace in Asia since the Korean War in a way that certainly hadn't been the case in the first half of the 20th century. And if you talk to our Asian, Trump people like to make a big deal of how they're pivoting to Asia. They're really serious about Asia. If you talk to Japanese, South Koreans, Taiwanese, Filipinos, Indonesians, Australians, they say the single worst thing you could do for the Asian alliance is to betray Ukraine. And Trump is clearly not interested in aiding or standing by Ukraine.
Bill.
Well, Bill, I'm really glad that you're bringing up Ukraine because the president has done more in his first 100 days to help the Ukrainian people and help bring an end to the war that is raging and causing endless killing on both sides. He has said it over again. He has dedicated more manpower hours to, again, achieving a ceasefire and trying to work towards a final peace between Russia and Ukraine. I don't think you have much to point to in the record of the previous administration and success on that. And again, let me remind our audience that under President Trump in his first administration, it was the only American presidency in recent history where Putin did not invade his neighboring countries.
Ellie, thank you. Bill, I'm going to go back to you for an answer to the next question, which is building really on this last exchange. Let's drill down further on the U.S.-European relationship in the second Trump administration. Clearly, America has been carrying a disproportionate share of the European defense burden, with more than 100,000 U.S. troops stationed on the continent. We also have more than 50,000 troops stationed in Japan. If the America First objective is to make homeland defense our highest priority, are we overextended, and couldn't a change in focus be in our national interest?
No. I mean, what would those 100,000 troops be doing? Defending us against an invasion from Canada? Does Trump want to send 100,000 U.S. Army soldiers who are trained to fight wars and to deter serious enemies, to deal with gang warfare on the border? A few thousand can help the Border Patrol, that's fine. But so those 100,000 troops, I don't think personally, I don't think we're under-investing in defense. I think we need to have a large military to deal with all the contingencies. It costs us something to have them in Germany and Japan. The host countries do pay a fair amount for that, but it's an incredibly cheap investment at the price to help maintain peace in Europe, to help reassure our European allies, to stop them from getting into conflicts and to having some kind of arms race and nuclear weapons and the like. And certainly that's the case with Japan. So, and incidentally, I don't think Donald Trump disagrees because he is not, did he ever say anything about pulling any troops out of Japan? If it's America first, why are we having these 50,000 people sitting there in Japan? That's not America first. That's doing something for the Japanese, and we can't do that because we only care about ourselves. But even Donald Trump knows that that would be foolish.
You know, Bill, that's a complete mischaracterization.
Even Donald Trump knows.
I think you have heard from the president.
I said even Donald Trump knows that that's
making sure that the United States is prepared for the necessity, if it comes, to deal with our peer adversary, China. And we don't have, you may not like the fact that there is a reality and a math in this world, but we don't have endless resources and we don't have endless manpower, and we cannot spread ourselves thin all across the world.
If I can finish my point,
none of our
let's break for a
second.
Step
up to the plate is not too much to ask. It's not too much to ask of wealthy European nations to pay their fair share of NATO
Ellie, we'll come back to you. Bill,
and other
finish
expenses.
your thought.
I mean, they've increased their share. Some of them are very small nations. If Denmark increases its defense budget from 2.2% to 2.4%, it's a rounding error in the turnover of Pete Hegseth's top staff in the Pentagon. It is not a serious, so this is a good talking point. We've pushed them. I was there 30 years ago pushing them. The Europeans should do more. We also didn't, in fact, mind that they weren't too militarily developed for sort of obvious historical reasons. But again, none of these troops in Europe are going to do anything. If there's a war with, God forbid, with China over Taiwan, we're not going to use the US Army, which is trained to fight ground wars in Europe and to deter ground wars in Europe. So you can say, if you want, I mean, fine, we can cut the troops in Europe a little bit. We could reshuffle troops in Japan and Korea. I give Trump credit for not going down that irresponsible path. In that respect, he is enough, and he's had enough advisors, especially in the first term, and I think really especially in the first term, who told him, you can't do this, this would be very dangerous, that they beat back some of the real America First diehards who said, we've got to pull these troops back from abroad.
Bill, thank you. Ellie, if you'd like to finish your response to Bill, I'll let you do that, and then I have a question for you.
Yeah, again, it's the notion that the United States has endless resources and it's just a rounding error. I can't help but notice how elitist that is. And where does that leave the American taxpayer, right? Where does that leave the American taxpayer? We're supposed to cover, the security expenses of wealthy Western European nations while our own citizens are suffering. It makes no sense, and it's also the reality is that it's just not possible. Every country has to prioritize, and the United States must prioritize also. So again, I go back to what I started with. The United States is securing our own hemisphere, we're securing the Indo-Pacific, we're securing the Middle East, and we're doing a lot in Europe as well. If the European allies step up and pay, their fair share of expenses and try to defend their own territory, it's only a win for everyone involved.
Thank you, Ellie. Now, let me turn to you for another question. You were quoted by the America First Policy Institute, a conservative think tank, as saying last May that an America First foreign policy charts an approach distinct from, as you put it, a foreign policy establishment that often keeps the United States mired in endless wars to the detriment of the country by putting idealistic principles ahead of the interests of the American people. And I was struck by the way you characterized idealistic principles. Isn't the defense of such idealistic principles as freedom and democracy an ingredient and an example of American greatness?
Go ahead, please, applause, because I agree with you. Jason, I'm going to answer this question with the lens of someone who was born in the Middle East and blessed to find refuge in the United States as a child, escaping the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979. And so, yes, freedom and democracy are part of what makes America great. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It's why I love my country, and I was so honored to serve in the Trump administration to be able to give back to the country I love. But here is the distinction. Democracy as a form of government works great in the US and the West as a product of centuries of political evolution which took place in Europe and in the United States. It is a mistake, however, to think that what works well in the West will necessarily work well elsewhere, specifically in the Middle East, North Africa. I have to say I spent time in the Middle East on official travel when I served in the Trump administration, and also I was invited back by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Kingdom of Bahrain. I have personally witnessed the monarchies in that region and how their citizenry benefits from those forms of government. And my opponent here, I must say, on the night of the fall of Mubarak in Egypt, went on Fox News and cheered that on. Explain to me the eventual rise of Morsi in Egypt. Bill thought that was fantastic. Explain to me how is it that a Muslim Brotherhood representative, a Muslim Brotherhood government with a full military on the border of Israel, explain to me how that's a wonderful development. Explain to me how Hamas, also a Muslim Brotherhood offshoot, sitting on the border of Israel in Gaza, also with all of the terror capabilities of the Islamic Republic of Iran supporting them. How is that a good development? There is no good answer for it.
Ellie, thank you. Bill, would you like to respond?
Look, not every place is it's not as easy to have democracy in every place as it is. Well, it's not so easy in the US, it turns out, actually, if I could say. And I'm not joking about that. It turns out that many places are susceptible to various forms of fanaticism and demagoguery and just foolishness, which can damage democratic governments. One of the great achievements of the US has been being the cornerstone of a world order that became freer and more democratic for at least the first 60, 65 years after World War II, and really brought wonderful things to people in Eastern Europe who were also all told that you don't have much of a democratic heritage, and of course Taiwan and many other places in Asia, Japan, at least. Israel's in the Middle East, and one reason it's a great ally of ours is that it's a wonderful liberal democracy. It's not, contrary to some of President Trump's supporters, because of the power of the Jewish lobby, as Tucker Carlson thinks. It's because we have common values with Israel. So you can't at the one and the same time say, I don't think, we really have a deep relationship with Israel, not just a transactional one, not just one where it's useful to be with them sometimes, but hey, you know what? We can also go against them if it's useful. That was actually the old Republican Party that Reagan fought against, that was very friendly to the Arab oil states and a little suspicious, I would say, of Israel. The relationship with Israel is as deep as it is because it's based on values. And I don't think you can throw those values overboard then and start going on about how great these, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, maybe it was prudent to have the accords. I didn't criticize those. We'll see how that all works out. I just don't think we should kid ourselves about what it's like, however, to be a dissident or a foreign worker or a woman in Saudi Arabia.
Bill, thank you. I have a question for you. In the first Trump administration, America embarked on or supported no large military interventions abroad. Ellie pointed that out. It pulled the United States out of the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, a deal of which you had been sharply critical yourself. It wound down the long American military presence in Afghanistan. With the historic Abraham Accords, it brokered peace between Israel and 3 Arab states. In light of these achievements, even with a president who routinely clashed with European allies and pulled the United States out of a series of international agreements, was an America First policy in those 4 years a mistake?
I think the Trump first term was a mixed bag, and I think I said this at the time, though I still thought he was a bad president, shouldn't be reelected, maybe more for domestic policy reasons at that point. But one reason is that he had people who are representatives of that terrible, failed, old-fashioned, stale status quo that Ellie's so upset about. They were running the foreign policy. Who were the secretaries of defense? Jim Mattis and Mark Esper. Who was the Secretary of State? Mike Pompeo, someone I had worked with closely when he was in Congress. He said he got blocked from the second term because he's a dreaded neocon, which means he does believe that some of these values and principles matter. John Bolton was National Security Advisor, and McMaster before him. Vice President Pence was someone I knew pretty well in Congress and was very much attached to Israel because of reasons of principles and democracy and values. So I think there was a case to be made, and the Trump first term did some good things, did some not so good things, and Trump was, as he himself has complained, was hemmed in by all these advisors who stopped him from doing many foolish things. The second term, who do we have in place of Jim Mattis and Mark Esper? Pete Hegseth. Who do we have in the national security seat in place of General McMaster and John Bolton? Congressman from Florida, Mike Waltz. Who do we have running intelligence in place of Pompeo and then Gina Haspel? Tulsi Gabbard. Who do we have as vice president? J.D. Vance. In place of Mike Pence. I think a Trump second term is going to be very dangerous for peace and prosperity around the world. And I hope it isn't, because I hope, I want us to do well. I want everyone to do as well as possible. But I'm very worried about the Trump second term.
Thank you, Bill. Ellie, would you like to rebut?
Yeah, I mean, Bill, I think you've been very worried about, President Trump probably from the day you laid eyes on him. But the American people just gave him a resounding victory and a mandate. And listen, you know what? I can't help it if I'm in an audience with, liberal Jews who don't like to hear the reality. But you know what? The American people have spoken, okay? And they have, and listen, you know what? I have to tell you guys, that it might be difficult for you to hear this, But this is the administration and the president that has stood the strongest with the state of Israel. He's the best friend the Jewish people have ever had. And the very fact that there is so much Trump derangement syndrome in this room of the American Jewish Committee, I mean, it's appalling. And there's a lot of work that the American Jewish world needs to do. A little bit of reflection in the mirror. Try to understand that after 18 months of October 7th and what we have been through as a people in this country under the previous administration, tonight in New York City, do you guys know that there's a pogrom taking place in Crown Heights? Do you know that? Do you know that the mayor of New York yesterday decided to stand with the perpetrators who came into Crown Heights, into a Jewish neighborhood, instead of standing with the Jewish victims? How long are American Jews going to stand around and be so confused about who your friends are and who your enemies are? I mean, it's just shocking to me.
Thank you, Ellie. Please have no further interruptions in the middle of remarks, but again, feel free to applaud at the end of each speaker's talk. I'm going to stay with you,
Ellie. Say a word about that, or?
Please, thank you. We read last week of the Trump administration's plans to... All right.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I mean, I don't know if I've lost track of who's responding to whom here, but I was going to say, it's unfortunate if Mayor Adams said something foolish that you don't like. He's, of course, become a great buddy of President Trump and was pardoned, expects to be pardoned by President Trump, and was down at Mar-a-Lago a couple of weeks ago. So I'll let you litigate that intra-MAGA problem there. But look, Donald Trump had, I think, a genuine businessman from New York, obviously family reasons, a genuine connection with Israel. And I give him credit, and that was good, and I'm glad he did, and I think it prevented him from following the logic of America first to its logical end, which is to say, well, Israel's another country, it's not us. What are we taking all kinds of risks for Israel for? Why are they getting all this military aid? And of course, Tucker Carlson, I'd say J.D. Vance has gone pretty far down that road. Tucker Carlson and many, many other MAGA types have gone all the way down that road. That is the original America First point of view. I hope Trump resists it. I hope some people around him say, Mr. President, don't go there. I hope his natural kind of New York roots kick in and he doesn't treat Israel the way he treats Ukraine, for example. But I don't think for the movement as a whole, the future, Israel should not bet its future on a MAGA America First movement.
Yeah, right, because Israel should plan its future on what we saw under the Biden administration, where we have now found full evidence that they were holding back, rearming Israel while she was in the middle of a seven-front war of her existence. That's who Israel should bank on.
Thank you. Thank you both. Debate kind of spun off in a different direction, but I'm glad that we did. Ellie, let me get back. We read last week of the Trump administration's plans to significantly reorganize and downsize the State Department. This is on top of the effective shuttering of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, and two government-supported foreign policy centers, the U.S. Institute of Peace and the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars, along with the U.S. withdrawal from the World Health Organization and the UN Human Rights Council. In the Republican platform last year, the party promised to, quote, strengthen economic, military, and diplomatic capabilities to protect the American way of life from the malign influences of countries that stand against us around the world. How does that goal square with these cutbacks in our hard and soft diplomacy tools?
Jason, you mentioned the United Nations, so let's start by talking about the UN, an institution whose very founding was premised on and tied into the need for an international body to make sure that the horrors of the genocide committed against the Jewish people in the Holocaust would never again happen. That very body has now turned into a bastion of obsessive anti-Semitism against the one and only Jewish state. In 2024 alone, the UN General Assembly passed 17 resolutions on Israel versus 6 on the entire rest of the world, which include 1 resolution on North Korea, 1 on Iran, 1 Syria, 1 Russia, and wait for it, 1 for the United States for its embargo on communist Cuba. The UN and its agencies have been captured by China and the Global South, and the Trump administration has been crystal clear the US does not relinquish its sovereign rights to any international organizations. I believe the time has come for the United States to stop underwriting something like 25% of the UN's overall budget. And thank you, yes, let's clap for that. And Jason, when it comes to the budget cutting and the consolidation that is being proposed for the State Department by the Trump administration, let me just share that when I worked at the State Department, there was so much fraud, waste, and abuse going on in that bureaucracy that any American would be horrified to know about it from the inside. And so the cutting that we're going to see, hopefully, at the State Department and these agencies will only help us actually achieve mission of diplomacy and help us achieve that soft power and hard power that you were just referring to.
Thank you, Ellie. Bill, I think you'd like to rebut.
I mean, I think the United Nations has not been an admirable organization. I've never been a defender of it. I worked very hard in 1990, I guess, 89, 1991, actually with John Bolton. I was Vice President Quayle's Chief of Staff, and for some reason, the Vice President was put in charge in the White House of trying to repeal the infamous Zionism is racism resolution, and we did get that repealed, and I don't know, it was good to at least get that done. The UN is at times can be useful. Other international organizations, some of them can be quite useful from a practical point of view. Some of them kind of, pointless and harmless. Some of them harmful. And I totally agree that we should pick, and choose which ones we join. The UN Human Rights Council was certainly worth getting out of, for example. And I agree with that. But that's not the same as neutering the U.S. State Department, which was full of diplomats. There was some waste, there was some redundancy, no question. There were too many layers that accumulated over the years. On the other hand, we accomplished an awful lot over the last 60, 70, 80 years, and we used a lot of soft power and a lot of diplomacy. And diplomacy, as President Trump himself likes to say, is better than war. And we've got a lot of good things done with diplomats, and now it's just being cut randomly. USAID there's some minor, there were some redundancies, I guess you might say, but they did an awful lot of good around the world. And incidentally, you know who they worked with a lot in some of these African countries? Israelis, who also try to do some humanitarian things, partly out of self-interest, obviously, to improve Israel's image and help increase the chance that they'll be recognized by some of these countries and so forth. But just slashing USAID, why? A small part of the budget, and we'll see, and doing it in the most reckless and kind of heartless way to people who had worked for decades sometimes abroad trying to deal with maternal health or diseases and the like.
Thank you, Bill.
I want to take a moment to talk about USAID. Bill, when I was doing my research for this panel, an article popped up about USAID funding one of your affiliated institutions. And so, look, there is so much corruption that has been found at USAID. And Bill just mentioned Israel. I think the latest news out of Israel on Israeli media channels was that, in fact, USAID funds were being used to help undermine Israel's elected Prime Minister Netanyahu after the October 7th attack. So that's where the U.S. taxpayer dollars have been directed, much of it. And I think it's only fair to say that the State Department wants to stop funding fraud, waste, and abuse. And we want to be careful with the American taxpayers' dollars. And essentially, a lot of the work of USAID and USAGM, Voice of America, is being proposed to be brought back under the umbrella of the Department of State where it belongs.
Bill, if you would like to respond to that, you may.
No, I mean, you should really read more broadly than MAGA Twitter on X, because USAID did not, this story was created out of thin air. USAID, I think, once partnered on a project with a major foundation. That foundation ended up giving money to, I think, another group, which 5 years later gave separate money to us as part of our attempts to defending democracy together to make the case, I can't remember which issue it was, for the rule of law for Ukraine or something like that, totally normal grant process, private foundation. But because USAID once worked with this foundation, we took USAID money. It's ludicrous. We don't take any government money. And I have no view on what USAID did with this foundation 5 years before, but it didn't have much to do, or anything to do with us. There may be a lot of waste at the State Department. I suppose there may be some abuse. I'm not sure what that means exactly. Accusing people of fraud is pretty serious, and there should be evidence of fraud. And Donald Trump and his appointees ran the State Department for 4 years. They've run it for 3 months now. How many Foreign Service officers have been indicted for fraud? How many people you say you saw fraud? Did you report it to the authorities and to the, fraud is a crime. I mean, it's really a disservice. Believe me, I was in government and I had my problems with the State Department and they were slow and we were impatient sometimes and all this. An awful lot of people have worked awfully hard over the years for the US government, doing their best as they saw it, as their bosses saw it mostly, because these were not the policymakers, to advance US interests, to do what they was right, to represent the US, to process visas and, all the things you do in a consulate, as a consular official somewhere, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just to accuse them all of being part of a fraudulent enterprise, that's really not right.
Thank you, Bill.
Bill, I just want to take a moment.
Well, sure.
I'm glad that, Bill, you could come clean with the audience and talk about that there is some connection for you with USAID. You're in the business of politics, and we all know that money is fungible. And I think this is just a perfect example of the kinds of funding that USAID was doing, where, again, money is fungible, and a lot of those dollars were diverted to places where even you in this audience would find it shocking.
I would really like to point out, Ellie, to everybody, actually, that we are
not the entire audience, but some. How about that?
As a former board member of New York Region. Bill, I'm going to start again with you. When you were Chief of Staff to Vice President Dan Quayle, he famously declared in December 1989 that the United States, under President George H.W. Bush, would press for the repeal of the notorious 1975 UN resolution equating Zionism with racism, a goal that was realized with the UN General Assembly vote 2 years later. You've been critical of the UN and its member agencies. You just did it just now, along with Ellie. Why is it in American national interest to stay engaged at considerable expense with an international forum that often seems to advance policies at odds with those of US government? This is a question that one hears from administration officials and its supporters. I should add that in AJC's view, the benefits of engaging international agencies, even engaging them critically and with aggressive advocacy, do outweigh the disadvantages, that ignoring problematic multinational bodies doesn't make them go away. But do you think the administration is wrong if it charts a different course?
Yeah, I agree with the AJC. That was an easy one. I mean, you guys actually know a lot about this, right? You actually work in countries abroad on serious things, helping Jews abroad, obviously, helping try to shape situations to prevent conflict that will damage the interests either of Israel, but more of Jews locally and so forth. And you know that these international organizations are a mixed bag and are cumbersome, and some of them are hostile, and parts of some of them are hostile to Israel, no question about it. But parts of them are important, and anyway, they're going to exist. And if we're not part of them, we have much less ability to check them from going in much worse directions and becoming captives, really, of who? Russia a little bit, but really China. China's the big peer competitor. I agree with Trump about this. They have a lot of money. They're doing their best to build relationships in Africa and Asia and everywhere else. And if you just pull out of organizations and leave China to be the place that's bringing the aid, that's bringing the health care, that's building the roads, that's dealing with the governments, but also propagandizing to the people, China gets stronger and we get weaker.
Thank you, Bill. Ellie, please respond.
I think it's just a lot of wishful thinking and not being in touch with the present reality, which is that China has already captured the United Nations, they've captured the WHO, but meanwhile, America is footing the bill, and so it's just time to stop that. I certainly believe in the potential for multilateral organizations, but again, only to the extent that they respect US sovereignty and only to the extent that they actually reflect American values, the will of the American people, and bring some benefit to the United States of America.
Thank you, Ellie. Ellie, I'm going to stay with you on another question. Let's focus on one particular foreign policy objective with which you've been closely associated, the global fight against anti-Semitism, against its persistence, its resurgence. You waged this fight when you were Deputy Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Antisemitism in the first Trump administration. Is it consistent with or at cross purposes with an America First approach to bring more countries on board in support of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism and last year's global guidelines for countering anti-Semitism? I'd point out that UNESCO also contributes programmatically to the fight against anti-Semitism, and that earlier this year the UN issued an action plan to monitor and respond to anti-Semitism, a plan to which AJC contributed. Is this an area in which the Trump administration sees, perhaps uniquely in this area, the benefit of that kind of collaborative, multinational action, multilateral action?
So, Jason, you are speaking a bit about the AJC and your own engagement in these multilateral organizations, and I want to commend the AJC on the work that you do every day on anti-Semitism. As I mentioned, I was a former member of the New York Regional Board, and I want to congratulate you on your partnership with USC Shoah Foundation, which you announced yesterday. However, I have to take issue with some statements that were made from this podium here yesterday that would seem to criticize in some way the Trump administration's accomplishments in its first 100 days to confront the tsunami of anti-Semitism that we, the Jewish people, Jewish Americans, faced unprecedented after October 7th in this country, a 400% tsunami, again, of anti-Semitism on our campuses and on our streets. And so let's talk about the Trump administration anti-Semitism policy. Let's talk about the fact that President Trump, 8 days after coming into office, in his second term, signed an executive order that brings a whole-of-government approach to the fight to anti-Semitism. And so when, in fact, foreign aliens and foreign students apply for visas to come to this country on the premise of coming here to study, but in fact, when they applied for that visa, they did not let our consulates and our embassies know that they're actually coming to the United States to target Jews, or they're coming here to disrupt our society. And in those cases, those students would not have received those visas in the first place. So thank you. And so the notion, I'm really glad we can agree on that. And so the notion that, that foreign aliens who come to the United States are owed due process is ludicrous. It's not American law. U.S. citizens are guaranteed due process. And so here's what I would say. You may not like it. You know, here's the irony. You may not like it, but this is the administration that is taking a whole-of-government approach to combating the tsunami of anti-Semitism that we've been facing in this country under the previous administration until Trump came back into office. And what that has been the Department of Justice being involved. It's been the State Department revoking visas and revoking immigration status. It has been the Department of Education withholding funds, whether you like it or not, withholding funds from these corrupt universities that are complete moral decay, that cannot tell you, yes, that cannot tell you whether defending their Jewish students is a basic right that Jewish students have on these campuses. And so this is the administration that is finally standing up and using every power of the federal government to defend American Jews, but also to defend all of society. And so here's my message. I stand with President Donald Trump in this. I stand with the Trump administration on this. If you come to this country because you want to target Jews or you want to undermine our society, I have 3 words: deport, deport, deport.
Bill, I'm going to let you wrap up, and then I'm going to
can I answer
closing
that?
remarks, please.
You know, I really think Jews, with all due respect to the people who just applauded, should be careful about applauding the notion that Jews will do well in a society that does not respect due process. I mean, first of all, some of these people should be deported. If they should be given due process and then deported, and that's perfectly doable. The notion that you can't do that is ridiculous. Others have been swept up in a net. I mean, if someone comes to study medicine as a postdoc at Tufts and co-signs an op-ed that's pro-Palestinian in terms of Gaza, has never taken on, never discriminated against Jews to our knowledge, works with Jews, is a postdoc who's helping, presumably, make some medical advances, might be the kind of person which might help America and help the world. You snatch her on the street at 6 a.m. You don't say, well, come here, we want to talk to you about whether there's a question about your status. You snatch her on the street, make a big show of it at 6 a.m. That's not America, and that's not good for Jews. One last thing on the universities, the horrible universities. Depriving the medical centers in Boston, many of which are connected to Harvard, the research centers, to $7 billion to study diseases, is not doing a favor for Jews. It's not doing a favor. It's not doing a favor for this country. It's not putting America first, incidentally. Do we think is Dana-Farber an evil place that should lose research funding?
Oh, absolutely, Bill. Because let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. The universities receive their status and their accreditation based on the research that they conduct, not on gender studies and not on their, corrupted Middle East studies departments. And the fact that the universities are refusing to institute budget cuts in what what we used to call the liberal arts departments, they're saving those departments and instituting cuts into the research. That's up to the universities. I only wish that Harvard would fight the anti-Semitism on their campus and fight the pro-terror movement that's embedded itself in that university harder than it's fighting the Trump administration. I mean, really, how can you defend such a thing?
First of all, if I could just say I know a little about her. Alan Garber, in fact, has done a better job, and I think I've just talked to a Jewish young woman who's graduating from Harvard next month. It was a rough month or two there, and she's made it through fine, and she's graduating. This last year has been much better. But anyway, what's the case for taking $7 billion of research funds away from the medical schools? They're not going to be used for they're not.
Bill, the case is that the United States government is taking a stand against anti-Semitism. Finally, they are hurting the university.
You really think Harvard?
You think
Alan Garber is deciding?
Wallets,
you think Alan Garber
that is
likes?
The only leverage. And you know what?
This is just demagoguery.
Have
you been to any of these universities in the last few years?
This is really amusing that you're saying that.
Well,
I want you to know that I'm a graduate of Barnard College, Columbia University, which I am terribly ashamed of to this day. Okay, I used to be proud. I'm an immigrant. I was the first in my family to go to college. We had to save money to go to college. And I did all that, Bill, but I am so ashamed of my alma mater. And in fact, Harvard, I know the very elite institution that...
No, I don't care about Harvard. They're taking money away from other places.
But I want you
One
to
at a time.
I want you to know that I was actually invited by the Jewish students at Harvard last year, and I went to their campus and I spoke to the beleaguered students. Yes, and I tried to give them comfort.
And how beleaguered were they? How beleaguered were they? I spoke at Harvard a couple of times to Jewish groups too. They were doing pretty well, actually, by last year, no?
So that's where your stance is, Bill.
My standing is that we should fight anti-Semitism and not be demagogic about how much of it there is or how bad it is.
You know what, Bill? Here's the situation as I see it. This country needs a hard reset. We were going down a very slippery slope of anti-Semitism that was putting our entire society at risk. If there's any lessons to be learned from World War II and the Holocaust, it's that the hatred that begins with the Jew never ends with the Jew, and every society that has allowed anti-Semitism to flourish has eventually self-destructed. That was the path that we were on. That is the path that our universities are on, and I would think that a Jewish audience would applaud the government that is standing with them.
Thank you, Ellie. Okay. I know you're getting tired of hearing me say this. Now we're just going to move to closing remarks. And Ellie, in reverse order from the beginning, we're going to ask you to begin, and then Bill, and then I don't think we're going to be rebutting on into midnight. So Ellie, thank you, and please begin.
Well, this conversation was centered around America First foreign policy. And again, I need to only remind our audience of what was achieved under the first Trump administration. We had peace in the Middle East, we had an Iran that was deterred, and we had a Putin that did not invade his neighbors. I am confident that President Trump is going to reestablish deterrence. He's ready to take on all of our adversaries. He knows how to treat our allies as allies, our adversaries as adversaries. But also, since our conversation moved and changed a little bit as I was here tonight. I do want to end on this note that I do think that the American Jewish community is at a crossroads, and we really do need to spend some time having perhaps tough conversations about what the future of American Jewry is, okay? And where do we stand right now in this moment where there is so much partisanship that perhaps we can't even tell what's good for us and what's not good for us. And the final note I want to share with you is that I am a Jew who had to escape my home in Iran because the radical Islamists came and took over my country and my home that I lived in, that my roots and ancestry go back thousands of years. And I am here just to ring alarm bells for you, to let you know that as comfortable as all of us might be, that is Jewish history. Jewish history has taught us that we have to wake up to the threat of anti-Semitism and take it seriously, because too often we've learned the tough lessons, that the hatred can spread very quickly and undermine the societies that we've been very comfortable in. So again, you know, I hope that you will stand with me and all of those who are your true allies in this fight.
Thank you, Ellie. Bill, I think you get the last word.
I mean, I'm very glad that Ellie and her parents and hundreds of thousands of Iranian Jews were able to come to America. I have many, many friends from among that community, and my kids have friends of their children and so forth, are friends with their children and so forth. They came because we welcomed them, because we did not turn them away at the border, because we did not say we're not taking anyone from a Middle East country, because how do we know there aren't some terrorists smuggled in there as well? We are currently sending Afghans who fought with us, and our son fought in Afghanistan, who fought with us and translated for us in Afghanistan, many of them Christians actually. We are sending them back to Afghanistan into almost certain death. Why? Because Donald Trump wants to say he's getting rid of everyone from Arab or Islamic countries. That is not America, and I think that's bad for the Jews. And the nativism at home goes hand in hand, unfortunately, with the America First foreign policy, which is why both should be rejected.
Bill and Ellie, we wanted a robust, great debate, and we got one. And I want to thank you both very much for being here and for your contribution to this conversation. And thank you all, and good night.